How are you guys doing today? Today I want to talk about, should I pay a debt that is 7 years old? This is a topic that I've gotten on my YouTube page. A couple of people have asked with regards to that. So I'm going to explain to you if in fact that is feasible for something for you to do. So stay tuned. My name is Jay, and welcome to Ask a Debt Collector, a subsidiary of Clear and Strategic. Now, I've been in the debt collection industry for over 15 years. I've done it all, from management to owning 2 debt collection companies. Over the last 10 years, I've been the go-to guy for friends and family for questions regarding debt and credit. Now I want to be that person for you. If you have any questions, put them down in the comment section. I promise I'll answer those questions. Let's go. When I was a debt collector and we were collecting on accounts, one of the main things we would do as collectors is we always wanted to know the statute of limitation with regards to the accounts that we actually received, right? So because I was in California, we did work accounts in other states, but majority of the accounts that we worked were in California. We had an in-house attorney with regards to suing and so forth with regards to the account. And so it was very, very vital as a collector to figure that out. The reality is the newer the debt is, the more likely it was for us as a collector to actually collect the money from the consumers. The older the debt, the harder it becomes, right? And the reason why is because when it's older, chances are it's passed through a couple of agencies. And so when the consumer gets on the phone and you talk about the debt, a lot of times they'll be, oh yeah, I remember this company called me or that company called me. And a lot of times if it's gone past, they don't pay. But the reality is sometimes what you realize with debt as it grows or as it gets older, you're just catching the consumer at a bad time. Maybe a year ago, everything was bad. We know how much things can change within a 6 month to a year time span. You catch them, 4 years later, and they're like, yep, now I'm in position to pay, and they can pay it. As a rule of thumb, we as collectors always wanted to know how old the debt was because that determined if in fact we would be able to collect on the accounts or not. So there are some things out there for you as a consumer to understand with regards to paying on a 7 year old debt. I am going to explain why or why not you may want to pay an account that is 7 years old. But before we get into that, one of the things that you guys have to understand is the terminology and what's being stated, right? So what is the statute of limitations on an account? That's the question. The reality is this: 7 years typically across the board with all debt, as long as it's not a judgment or a lien, but your regular debt, credit card debt, defaults on automobiles, etc. Cell phone bills that you didn't pay, SDG&E, your gas and electric bills, anything that's been a bill that you actually have that's gone on your credit report. Typically, it's 7 years before the account becomes time barred. And what I mean by time barred is basically it can no longer be placed on your credit report after that 7 year stipulation, right? So it's very important to understand that. But just because it's not on your credit doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to pay it. But we'll get to that a little bit later. So the second thing that's important is to understand, when does the clock start on your debt? Now, typically the clock starts the last date of payment that you made on that account, right? So a lot of times people think, oh, I had the account for 8 years. It's been old. If you've been paying those 8 years, then your time does not start on that debt. So for instance, I've had a person who had an account for 10 years, right? Where they were paying. It was a credit card. It was a revolving credit card. They were paying on it for years and years and years and years and years. 10 years. Maybe at like that 11th year time span, they sort of kind of maxed out the credit card and they couldn't afford to pay it. They were under the impression, because they had the account for 10 years, that, oh, it's been on my credit report for 7 years and it should not be reported as a negative or derogatory account because of that time span has already passed. So they were under the assumption that because they defaulted on that 11th year, they've been past the 7 years and it should come off their credit report. And that is not true. Your clock starts when determining a time barred account The main thing is from the date of last payment. So because that individual had the account for 10 plus years, in that 11th year when they defaulted, that last payment that was made at that time span is when the clock starts. So from that date, 7 years is when the account will be time barred. So if it was April 1st, 2000, that would be the time that you made the last payment on that account. That'll be the time that the clock actually starts, right? And then in April of 2007, it will be when the account becomes time barred, and that account should no longer be placed on your credit. Now, there are some other things with regards to starting up a clock. So a lot of times with accounts, we believe it's the date of last payment. If you made an arrangement with a collection agency, let's say, you called them up, you say, hey, you know what, you gave them a check by phone or a credit card by phone or whatever, or you even promised to pay them 2 weeks from now, and 2 weeks from now something popped up and things went bad and you weren't able to pay them, or they processed that transaction and it didn't go through. There's a possibility that that account can be restarted. This is why when you look through YouTube, a lot of times people say never pay on a collection account. In that case, given what it is that's going on, you don't want to make arrangements or you don't want to pay if, in fact, in my opinion, if you're not settling and being done with it. I've seen where a lot of times people will set up where they're paying, let's say, $25 a month towards their debt. They have a large debt, they may owe 10 grand. We'll accept, there's been times I'll accept $25 a month because to me as a collector, some money is better than no money. But you got to understand, as you're making those payments, I don't care how old the debt is. The debt could have been 5 years old. All of a sudden, you start making those payments, that restarts that clock. And what ends up happening a lot of times is if you end up defaulting, then because that clock started back up, then there's a possibility, depending on the state that you live in, you can be sued and a lot of other things. So a rule of thumb, I always tell people, unless you can afford to pay it in a one lump sum payment or maybe 2 payments, and 3 payments is pushing it. But maybe at 3 payments, if you know for sure you can pay it, then possibly do that. But with a one-time payment is always better because then, yes, your clock does start over, but at least the account has been rectified and taken care of, depending on the certain situation and circumstance that you're in. The key thing with regards to understanding of whether you should pay a debt that's 7 years old, it all depends, right? There are some states out there that even though an account is time barred and it's not able to be placed on your credit report, which is a national thing across the board through all 50 states, there's a possibility, like in some states, like in Ohio, for instance, they can sue you up to 10 years. So the account cannot be on your credit profile, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't sue you. So in that case, if a company is looking at suing you, the account has been time barred, meaning that 7 years past that last date of payment, and it may not be on your credit report. If they come after you with regards to suit or anything along those lines, then you're going to have to pay it. So it's very important, you as the consumer, depending on what state that you live in, that you look at the statute of limitation in your state, because they vary across the board with every state. Like in the state of California, we do fall under that 7-year statute, but only after, I believe it's 3 or 4 years, can a creditor sue you for a debt that you actually did not pay. So one or two things: get an attorney in your area and look it up, or you can go to Google University, look up the statute of limitation in your state and abide by those rules, right? Because they're different for every single person. Another thing is the timing with regards to paying an account. I always talk about this. If you're trying to get approved for a home, and let's say an account is on your credit profile, and let's say that the underwriting is going to be done, they're going to be running your credit again, you've got the inspection, everything's going on, and that account is on your credit profile, and they told you, hey, you have to take care of that account. If in fact it's not either deleted off your account, even though it's time barred, because sometimes accounts are still on your credit report that are time barred. So you as a consumer have to pull a copy of your credit report. And if you see those discrepancies, you have to dispute those accounts in accordance with the laws concerning that 7-year statute. But if you're trying to buy a home and they're saying, hey, you got to pay this account off or whatever the circumstance is, and maybe it's older, but it's still sitting on your credit report, and given the time frame, as you all know, those of you who have purchased homes, right at the end, after you get the inspection and you sign, your paperwork and so forth, the underwriter will run your credit one last time. And if that account is on your credit profile and it's not showing that it's satisfied, that can make you not be approved for the home. So in that case, you definitely would have to do it. And then there's the moral standpoint with regards to it. And I can't judge. I don't judge anyone, right? My motto is if it's not on your credit report, you don't owe it. But the reality is I've come across people where when I was a collector, I would call to them to pay on a debt, and they just feel the need because they knew that they had the account, and at the time they couldn't afford to pay it, but now 8 years later, they can't afford to pay it, that it's the right thing to do to actually pay the account off. Now, understand, if that collection company does place accounts on your credit profile, if it's been 8 years and you actually pay it off, they can throw it on your credit report for the next 7 years. But it's very key to ask that debt collection company if, in fact, they do report on your credit report. And if you do, in fact, pay the account past the time barred statute of limitation, if, in fact, they're going to place it back on your credit report. So the question is, do I pay an account that's 7 years old? It all depends, right? There are no one answer fits everybody because everybody's situation is different. Everybody's circumstance is different. But if you would like a free 20-minute consultation with me directly, down below, you can click the link and sign up. Pick the best time that works for you. A lot of times when talking to consumers, depending on where you are in your credit journey, we can help you get to that next level. The reality is it can, in fact, happen, but sometimes you just need the professional help and someone to help you out with regards to that. Secondly, down below is a free letter bundle. That free letter bundle, you'll get a pay to delete, a cease and desist letter, as well as a Goodwill letter. That's to help you out on your journey absolutely for free. Just opt in, make sure you fill out all the information, and boom, you'll get that an email where that comes. Now, for those of you out there, be sure if you are getting that free letter bundle that you check your junk mail. Sometimes the email will go to that one before, so that way you'll get your actual letters. Lastly, typically every Tuesday I'm going live to answer questions about credit or debt. Last Tuesday I didn't. I had a training. I completely forgot about it. I was supposed to go live after that, but I'm going to make sure I have scheduled to go live around 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm on the West Coast, and so that way you guys can come on, you can ask me questions about credit and debt and about just budgeting and life and so forth. And I like to make it personable. Sometimes I'll talk about my kids, sometimes I'll talk about vacations and credit cards or whatever the circumstance is. Be sure to jump on there, ask your questions, and I will definitely answer them. Now, if you have any questions about credit or debt, put them down in the comment section. I promise I'll answer those questions. And as I always state, you be great.